With most of its territory covered by desert and less than 2% of its land suitable for cultivation, yet at the same time having to feed a population that has grown nearly tenfold in just over 70 years, Saudi Arabia has been forced to pursue one of the most ambitious agricultural development programs in the world, expanding large-scale food production while protecting scarce groundwater resources that are being depleted faster than they can be replenished. From modern desalination plants along the coasts of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, billions of liters of water are treated and pumped deep into the desert, creating vast circular fields, high-tech greenhouse complexes, and extensive fruit-growing regions stretching across the sands. So how has Saudi Arabia managed to transform one of the driest places on Earth into a country capable of producing millions of tons of food every year? Today, join Agriculture Insight as we explore Saudi Arabia's agricultural sector, where technology, water resources, and national ambition are transforming barren deserts into modern food production hubs in the heart of the desert. Located at the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia is just over 1,000 kilometers by air from geopolitical hotspots such as Iran and Israel. Rather than using oil, the resource that has made it one of the most influential countries in the global energy market, as a political weapon to exert influence, Saudi Arabia recognized early on that its heavy dependence on food imports could also be used against it. As a result, the answer to all these concerns was food self-sufficiency. But can a desert nation with no perennial rivers and largely dependent on ancient groundwater resources like Saudi Arabia truly achieve food self-sufficiency? Amid the scorching desert, lush, green circular fields stretching more than 1 kilometer in diameter have become a symbol of Saudi Arabia's ambition to transform the desert into a large-scale, food-producing region. These man-made oases are not clustered together, but are scattered across areas that sit above some of the country's largest ancient groundwater aquifers. At the center of each circle is a well drilled hundreds of meters deep, more than a kilometer deep in some locations, penetrating rock formations that have existed for millions of years. From there, water is pumped to a massive mechanized irrigation system that slowly rotates around a fixed pivot point. The system typically takes between 12 and 24 hours to complete a full irrigation cycle, and to withstand the extreme desert heat, it may have to operate almost continuously throughout the growing season. It was here that Saudi Arabia's wheat miracle emerged in the late 20th century, when vast oil revenues enabled the large-scale deployment of thousands of center-pivot irrigation systems. As a result, wheat production increased from virtually nothing to more than 4 million tons per year, transforming Saudi Arabia from a food-importing nation into a self-sufficient producer that even exported wheat to neighboring countries. Farming schedules are carefully planned to maximize the use of available water. Wheat is planted during the winter and harvested in the spring before temperatures rise sharply. During the summer, many farms switch to alfalfa for livestock feed, corn, potatoes, or other crops that are better suited to extreme heat. Because these fields are designed around a fixed irrigation center, each one can be managed as a standardized production unit. GPS-guided tractors, seeders, and harvesters can operate with remarkable precision along each cultivation ring, reducing overlap, minimizing waste, and processing dozens of hectares in a single operation. However, behind this prosperity in the face of an unforgiving climate lies a critical weakness for the entire agricultural sector: how to sustain production while groundwater resources are being extracted at ever greater depths. From a geometric perspective, arranging circular fields side by side leaves up to 21% of the land between them without access to irrigation water. But an even greater challenge lies beneath the surface. Groundwater in these regions naturally contains significant amounts of dissolved minerals, while summer temperatures frequently exceed 110 degrees Celsius. Water evaporates rapidly after irrigation, but the salts remain in the soil. Over time, these salts accumulate, reducing crop yields, degrading soil quality, and eventually rendering entire fields unsuitable for cultivation unless regular leaching is carried out. This problem is far less severe in Egypt, where abundant fresh water from the Nile continuously replenishes the soil and helps flush away accumulated salts. However, desalinating seawater is not a cheap solution. For decades, most of Saudi Arabia's freshwater was produced through thermal desalination, a process that heats seawater to generate steam, which is then condensed into freshwater. This method is highly reliable, but it consumes enormous amounts of energy, effectively requiring the burning of millions of barrels of oil each year. To reduce costs and conserve its oil resources, most modern desalination plants have shifted to a more efficient solution: reverse osmosis technology. Instead of boiling water, the system uses extremely high pressure to force seawater through ultrafine membranes that trap salt and impurities. As a result, the cost of producing fresh water has fallen significantly, helping Saudi Arabia become the world's largest producer of desalinated water. Yet the fundamental challenge remains unchanged. Water may be more abundant, but if all of the water used for agriculture comes from desalination plants, production costs rise rapidly, making many staple food crops difficult to compete economically. For this reason, Saudi Arabia began pursuing a more ambitious goal: maximizing agricultural output from every cubic meter of water used. And that is precisely why high-tech greenhouse complexes are gradually becoming the center of modern Saudi agriculture. In North America and Europe, greenhouses are primarily used to protect crops from harsh winter weather and extend the growing season. In Saudi Arabia, however, their purpose is almost the exact opposite: keeping crops cool while using as little water as possible. Today, thousands of hectares of modern greenhouses can be found across the country, particularly around Riyadh and the major agricultural regions of central Saudi Arabia. Inside these facilities, large exhaust fans continuously remove hot air while evaporative cooling pads help lower temperatures. As a result, conditions inside the greenhouse are typically maintained at around 72 to 77 degrees Celsius, creating an environment where high-value crops such as tomatoes, cucumbers, and sweet peppers can be grown year-round, rather during a single season. Water is delivered directly to the root zone through drip irrigation systems, ensuring that every liter of water, Saudi Arabia's most precious resource, is used as efficiently as possible. This is especially important because fruits and vegetables, while essential to the diet, require large amounts of water to produce. For decades, Saudi Arabia relied heavily on imports to meet much of its demand for fresh produce. Today, however, a growing share of that supply is being produced domestically, instead of being shipped thousands of kilometers from Europe, Turkey, or neighboring Mediterranean countries. A greenhouse tomato plant typically takes about 3 to 4 months to produce its first harvest and continue bearing fruit for many months afterward. Once the tomatoes reach the desired size and ripeness, they are carefully picked, sorted, and packed by hand before being transported to distribution centers across the country. For Saudi consumers, this locally grown produce is often fresher than imported alternatives. Rather than spending days or even weeks traveling across international supply chains, it can be harvested and delivered to market within a much shorter period of time, even when it is grown in the middle of the desert. Thousands of years before the first oil field was discovered, there was one crop that enabled people to survive in the harsh Arabian desert: the date palm. Today, more than 30 million date palm trees are still cultivated across Saudi Arabia, producing over 1.6 million tons of dates annually and placing the country among the world's largest date producers. The heart of this industry lies in Al Qasim, the largest date-growing region in Saudi Arabia. Here, a date palm can take between 5 and 8 years before it begins producing significant yields, but once established, it can continue bearing fruit for decades. From August to October each year, the harvest season transforms these farms into non-stop operations. Date clusters weighing tens of kilograms are cut down from heights of more than 10 meters using specialized lifting equipment or by workers who climb directly up the trunks. Although Saudi Arabia ranks among the wealthiest countries in the world by per capita income, most of this work is still carried out by migrant laborers from South Asia and East Africa, the workforce that powers much of the Gulf region's agricultural sector. After harvest, thousands of tons of dates are transported to Buraydah, home to the largest date market in the world. During the peak season, long lines of trucks loaded with produce arrive continuously from across the country. The dates are sold through public auctions before moving on to modern processing facilities where they are cleaned, graded, packaged, and prepared for export. From the oases that once helped people survive in the desert, Saudi dates can now be found on supermarket shelves across the Middle East, Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia. Demand rises especially sharply during Ramadan, a period that can account for nearly 1/3 of annual sales, when hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world use dates to break their daily fast, continuing a tradition that has endured for more than a millennium. Alongside its ancient date palms, the Saudi desert is also nurturing a fruit tree that seems unlikely to survive in such an arid environment: the orange tree. Few people would expect to find orange-growing regions spanning thousands of hectares in the middle of Saudi Arabia's deserts. At Al Jaf Farm and in key agricultural regions across central Saudi Arabia, such as Al Kharj, growers cultivate more than 5 million sweet orange trees, producing over 150,000 tons of oranges each year. For an orange tree, a crop that naturally requires significant amounts of water, to produce juicy fruit in the middle of the desert, Saudi farmers must solve their greatest challenge: providing enough water without losing precious drops to the hot, dry air. Irrigation water is drawn from geological formations hundreds of meters below the surface and delivered directly to the root zone through drip irrigation systems, minimizing evaporation as much as possible. When the harvest season begins, typically running from November through March, farms race against time to pick the fruit entirely by hand in order to prevent damage to the delicate skin. Because desert temperatures rise rapidly after sunrise, workers often begin as early as 4 a.m., carefully clipping each orange from the tree and placing it into containers before the fruit is loaded onto refrigerated trucks that travel through the night. Saudi oranges also possess a fascinating biological characteristic. Thanks to intense year-round sunlight and the large temperature differences between day and night, the trees tend to accumulate higher levels of natural sugars in their fruit. As a result, many orange varieties grown in Al Jaf are known for their rich sweetness and high juice content, despite being cultivated in one of the driest regions on Earth. Even more interestingly, these temperature fluctuations create a unique phenomenon. For the peel to develop its bright orange color, the trees must experience winter nights below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise, the fruit may remain green on the outside, even though the flesh inside is fully ripe. The success of these orange groves in the sand has not only enabled Saudi Arabia to meet nearly 50% of domestic demand during the harvest season, but has also demonstrated that crops traditionally associated with Mediterranean climates can be grown commercially in the desert when sufficient technology and water resources are available. Nourished by the Nile for more than 5,000 years, Egypt, the cradle of one of the world's greatest agricultural civilizations, is gradually reaching the limits of its own survival. The country's greatest paradox is that it possesses nearly 1 million square kilometers of territory, roughly equivalent to the combined area of France and Germany, yet less than 4% of that land is actually suitable for cultivation. However, the problem is not simply the lack of farmland. The problem is that it is almost impossible to expand. While the population of this Muslim-majority nation continues to grow by around 1 million people each year, the amount of arable land has remained virtually unchanged, an inevitable limitation. Worse still, about 25,000 hectares of agricultural land disappear every year due to urbanization. As a result, nearly 60% of Egypt's food demand depends on external supplies, making the country one of the world's largest wheat importers. Not only is Egypt constrained by its harsh deserts, but it also faces a critical vulnerability. The entire nation depends almost entirely on a single river. Approximately 97% of Egypt's freshwater supply comes from the Nile, a river stretching more than 600 kilometers across 11 countries. Yet most of its flow originates from the Ethiopian highlands, where the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has raised concerns about the future of Egypt's water supply. This means that the fate of more than 110 million people depends on a river whose flow is not entirely under their control. While many see only hot, barren sand, Egypt sees a vast reserve of untapped land. If water can be delivered there, these areas could become a strategic space for absorbing population pressure, expanding food production, and strengthening national security. As a result, Egypt began constructing an unprecedented irrigation system, collecting, treating, and redistributing million cubic meters of water every day to transform nearly 1 million hectares of the Sahara into a new food-producing region for the 21st century. However, this is not the first time Egypt has attempted to turn the desert into farmland. Decades ago, the country placed enormous hopes on Toshka, a project celebrated as a miracle in the desert, yet its actual results fell far short of initial expectations. So what makes Egypt believe that this time will be different? And to understand how Egypt could create a second Nile Delta in the heart of the Sahara, we must begin with what seems like an impossible challenge: transporting millions of cubic meters of water across the desert. In 2021, the New Delta project was officially launched. More than 12,000 workers and hundreds of heavy machines operated almost around the clock, transforming the area into a massive construction site in the middle of a sea of sand. The first step was stabilizing the terrain, as building on constantly shifting sand presents a major challenge. Across a landscape where sand continuously moves under the influence of wind and temperature, hundreds of bulldozers worked relentlessly to level the ground, remove large sand dunes, and reshape the entire desert surface. Once the site had been prepared, canal excavation began. The canal was designed to be about 45 meters wide and 7 meters deep, capable of transporting enormous volumes of water using gravity alone. At the same time, the accuracy of the entire route was strictly controlled. The longitudinal slope was adjusted with an error margin of only about 2.5 centimeters per 30 meters, a level of precision that is almost unimaginable for a project stretching hundreds of kilometers. Amid temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius, the entire construction site operated like a giant machine, constantly moving across an endless sea of sand. Excavating the canal was only half the battle. The bigger challenge was moving billions of liters of water across more than 100 kilometers of desert while minimizing losses along the way. As a result, preventing water loss became one of the most important objectives of the entire project. After the canal bed was stabilized, a layer of fine sand, approximately 5 centimeters thick, was evenly spread to create a cushioning surface before 10 to 12 centimeter thick concrete slabs were poured in standardized sections. Between the concrete slabs, expansion joints were sealed with hot bitumen to prevent leakage, and allow the structure to expand and contract under the desert's extreme temperature fluctuations, where temperatures can range from around 10 degrees Celsius at night to over 50 degrees Celsius during the day. Upon completion, more than 124 kilometers of canal had been reinforced and waterproofed, creating one of the largest water conveyance systems in North Africa. Once the canal had been fully reinforced and waterproofed, the next step was the art of flow control. Along the canal route, intermediate regulating reservoirs covering approximately 2 hectares each were constructed to absorb flow fluctuations and maintain a stable water supply. But a giant canal alone could not support nearly 1 million hectares of farmland. Water still had to be delivered with precision to fields scattered across the desert. From the main canal, pipelines ranging from 1.5 to 3 meters in diameter are installed to deliver water to new agricultural areas in the desert. Most of the system is buried underground to minimize evaporation losses, while high-capacity pumping stations and automated control systems continuously regulate the flow, ensuring a stable water supply throughout the region. But what makes the new delta fundamentally different from Toshka and many desert reclamation projects before it is not the scale of the project. It is the water behind it. Most of the water comes from the agricultural drainage system in the Nile Delta, where it is collected and treated at massive facilities such as Al Hammam before being pumped back into the desert. When the first control gates were opened, water began flowing through the newly completed network of canals and pipelines. Every day, more than 7.5 million cubic meters of water move through this system, making the new delta one of the largest water redistribution networks ever built in North Africa. From this point forward, Egypt is not simply bringing water into the desert, it is recycling its entire irrigation system to create a new food production engine for the 21st century. As the first flows of water began moving through the new network of canals and pipelines, vast green oases gradually emerged across the heart of the Sahara. Spanning nearly 924,000 hectares of newly cultivated land, these remote desert regions are becoming one of the agricultural hubs contributing more than 15 million tons of agricultural products each year. For many Egyptian farmers, this is the first time they have watched the desert give way to green fields. One of the new delta's most important objectives is reducing Egypt's dependence on imported food. Wheat, the country's staple crop, sits at the center of that strategy. Egypt still imports around 10 to 12 million tons of wheat annually, equivalent to nearly 60% of domestic consumption. As harvest season arrives, wheat fields stretching for dozens of kilometers begin turning their characteristic golden color. High-capacity combine harvesters operate continuously to complete harvesting as quickly as possible, minimizing losses under the desert's extreme temperatures. Thanks to the vast new agricultural land in the Sahara, the new delta has the potential to add approximately 1 to 2 million tons of wheat production per year, about 4 times the wheat output that Toshka once achieved. But Egypt's history includes numerous desert projects that failed because the soil quickly became salinized. This raises a question even more important than production. Can the new delta endure for decades, or is it merely a short-term success? To avoid repeating the failures of the past, New Delta was designed not only to bring water into the desert, but also to control salt accumulation through drainage systems and continuous soil monitoring. In the long run, the project's success will be determined not by how much water is pumped in, but by its ability to preserve soil fertility for decades to come. Egypt is not only trying to grow more food, it is also trying to reduce billions of dollars in agricultural imports. With more than 3,000 hours of sunshine each year, The hot, dry climate of northern Egypt provides ideal conditions for sunflower cultivation. Low humidity helps reduce pests and diseases, while abundant sunlight increases the oil content of the seeds. Beyond supporting domestic cooking oil production, sunflowers also help Egypt reduce its dependence on imported vegetable oils. Every year, the country spends more than $1.5 billion importing edible oils and oilseeds to meet the needs of its population of over 110 million people. With average yields of around 2 to 3 tons of seeds per hectare, and oil content exceeding 40%, each hectare of sunflowers can produce nearly 1 ton of vegetable oil, significantly higher than many traditional crops under arid conditions. This makes sunflowers an ideal choice for the dry lands of the Sahara, where every cubic meter of water must generate the highest possible economic value. While wheat sustains the population at home, Egypt's legendary cotton is grown to compete in some of the world's most premium textile markets. In an industry dominated by massive producers such as China, India, and the United States, Egyptian cotton accounts for less than 1% of global production. What makes this cotton so special is something that is almost impossible to see with the naked eye. Extra-long staple cotton varieties possess fibers that are significantly longer and stronger than those of conventional commercial cotton, allowing the production of premium fabrics renowned worldwide for their softness and durability. But that quality also comes with strict requirements. To preserve the fiber structure, much of this premium cotton must still be harvested carefully to minimize damage during production. Its exceptional value has also made premium cotton one of the most counterfeited products in the world. In 2016, Walmart, Target, and Bed Bath & Beyond were even involved in a controversy after selling products labeled 100% Egyptian cotton that were later found to contain different types of cotton. These controversies only further highlight the unique value of the Egyptian cotton brand. With cotton exports generating more than $500 million annually and the textile industry contributing nearly $4 billion in revenue, Egyptian cotton remains one of the most important pillars of the country's economy. Beyond crop cultivation, livestock farms, food processing facilities, and logistics hubs have also been developed, while crops such as corn, sugar beets, potatoes, and olives are helping transform the desert into a diversified agricultural hub. The true significance of the new delta may extend far beyond the borders of Egypt. As the global population continues to grow and climate change places increasing pressure on water resources and agricultural land, more and more countries are facing the same urgent question: how can we produce more food with fewer resources? The new delta represents one of the largest real-world attempts to answer that question. Yet the project also comes with enormous challenges. With an estimated cost approaching $10 billion, the new delta depends on a vast water treatment and distribution network that may consume as much as 10 million kilowatt-hours of electricity every day. If successful, a region once defined by sand and rock could become a model for arid nations across the world. But if it fails, it may go down as one of the most expensive agricultural gambles in modern history. Do you think New Delta will be remembered as one of the greatest engineering achievements of the 21st century, or as a costly lesson written in the sands of the Sahara? In our next video, we will travel to Australia, where people are not struggling against the limits of survival, but instead trying to control millions of invasive animals that have grown beyond human control. California, by nearly every measure, is a true powerhouse. Yet it is also a state carrying a fatal weakness within itself. Nearly 39 million residents live in a place without water. The paradox is that although nearly half of the state's total area is covered by desert and arid land, California is not only home to two massive coastal urban regions, but also the agricultural heart of the United States. Nearly all of America's leafy greens during winter come from Imperial Valley. Meanwhile, Central Valley produces nearly 40% of the nation's fruits and nuts, even though the region accounts for only around 1% of total U.S. farmland. By natural logic, this should have been one of the most difficult places in the country to develop agriculture. So, how did California achieve it? Part of the answer lies in advantages few places possess. California is almost a perfect natural blueprint, with a rare Mediterranean climate and more than 300 sunny days each year. In addition, more than 700 miles of the California Aqueduct, along with systems such as the Los Angeles Aqueduct, the Colorado River Aqueduct, vast irrigation networks, and groundwater extraction have pulled water from the north, from melting mountain snow, and from distant rivers to feed dry valleys. California did not wait for nature to allow it. It forced nature to serve it. But every system built to defeat nature comes at a cost. California's agricultural achievement is both a victory over natural limits and a growing contradiction. Agriculture now consumes about 80% of the water used by humans in the state, while the population continues to rise and the climate grows hotter. That is why the greatest debate in California is not whether agriculture has succeeded, but rather this question: how to divide a finite water supply among farming, cities, and the future of the state itself. Because despite every pressure, the fields here have never stopped operating. And to understand why that miracle still exists, we must begin with the very harvests that continue each day to resist the limits of this land. The journey of California's agricultural machine can begin with one of the most demanding, yet most beloved fruits in the world: strawberries. Strawberries are extremely delicate and can be bruised after only a few minor impacts. So harvesting is almost a brutal race against time. As the sun rises, thousands of workers are already bent over the planting rows, hand-picking only the berries that have reached perfect ripeness. An experienced worker can harvest hundreds of pounds per day, earning around $18 per hour or more during peak season. With strawberries, the moment they are picked is the moment the race begins. While many states have only a short strawberry season lasting around 4 to 8 weeks, California can maintain harvests for 8 to 10 months, even nearly year-round in some coastal regions, thanks to its mild climate and overlapping production zones. This is an advantage no competitor can replicate. The state currently produces around 90% of total U.S. strawberry output, with more than 1 billion pounds per year, far ahead of every other state such as Florida or North Carolina. The commercial value alone often exceeds $2 billion annually, making strawberries one of the highest value fruits in the state. Those trays of strawberries are then moved immediately into cooling facilities, sorted, packed, and loaded onto refrigerated trucks within hours to reach distribution centers across the United States. From supermarkets, dessert chains, and restaurants to yogurt brands, ice cream, smoothies, jam, pastries, and countless processed food lines, all depend on the continuous daily flow of fresh California strawberries. From an ordinary fruit in the American market, avocado has exploded into a symbol of brunch culture, avocado toast, guacamole, and a billion-dollar healthy living trend. Originating from the ancient lands of Chile and Peru, avocados later surged strongly in Mexico before entering the modern North American market. Today, California is the largest avocado-producing center in the United States, dominating around 90% of domestic output, with roughly 300 million pounds per year, depending on the season. Unlike strawberries that can be replanted quickly, Avocado is a perennial tree that requires 3 to 5 years before reaching commercial yields and demands a stable water supply through every season. On average, each avocado requires about 320 liters of water to fully develop, a figure that has sparked major controversy in California during prolonged drought periods. During the harvest season from around February to September, workers must use clippers to cut each fruit by hand, gently place it into bags worn on the chest, then transfer it into large bins to avoid bruising the skin. From there, avocados are sent to processing facilities to be washed, sorted by size, controlled for even ripening, and packed before being loaded onto refrigerated trucks headed to supermarkets across the United States. In a state facing both water shortages and mounting consumer waste, even avocado byproducts are being turned into new resources. California generates more than 40 million tons of waste each year, with single-use plastics posing a major challenge to recycling systems and coastal environments. As a result, avocado skins and pits after processing are being utilized at around 30% to produce bio-oil, cosmetics, compost, and many environmentally friendly biomaterials. Would you be willing to pay 1.5 to 3 times more for these green products instead of conventional plastics? No crop represents California's prosperity and the water cost behind it more than the most hated nut in America: almonds. California is currently the largest almond center in the world, supplying around 80% of global output and nearly 100% of U.S. production for many years. Each year, the state produces more than 2 to 3 billion pounds of almonds, with export value reaching billions of dollars. California's almond orchards are not sustained by rain. They are sustained by water carried from hundreds of miles away, flowing through drip irrigation lines with almost absolute precision. Every late winter and early spring, a massive biological migration takes place. More than 2 million honeybee hives from across the United States are transported by truck to California to pollinate millions of acres of almond orchards blooming at the same time, one of the largest pollination operations on the planet. During harvest season, usually lasting from around August to October, giant tree shaker machines clamp tightly onto the trunks and shake them violently for a few seconds so that all almonds fall onto the ground, which has been cleaned beforehand. After that, sweeper machines gather the nuts into long rows between the orchards, and pickup machines vacuum the entire layer of still-shelled almonds into storage compartments. From there, the almonds are sent to factories to remove the outer hull, dry them, sort them by size, inspect quality, and package them before being exported worldwide. But no crop has been criticized more than almonds. On average, producing just one almond may require around 3 to 4 liters of water. The problem is that almonds are a perennial crop. Once planted as orchards, farmers are forced to keep irrigating year after year to protect an investment that spans decades. With almonds, California cannot simply turn back. Its very success has locked in the choices of the future. If almonds represent wealth and controversy, then tomatoes represent California's pure industrial power. During the harvest season from around July to October, giant tomato harvester machines move straight into the fields, cut entire plants from the ground, then shake the fruit loose inside the mechanical system. Leaves, soil, and debris are removed while conveyor belts continuously dump tons of tomatoes into trucks driving alongside. In a short period of time, entire fields can be harvested cleanly, helping generate more than 10 to 12 million tons of processing tomatoes each year. But harvesting is only the first step. Because tomatoes ripen quickly and lose quality easily, trucks often drive directly from the fields to nearby factories. From ketchup in fast food chains, sauce on frozen pizzas, pasta sauce in supermarkets, to canned soup and convenience foods, millions of Americans consume California tomatoes every day without ever seeing where they began. California is currently the largest processing tomato center in the United States, often supplying around 90% of the nation's processed tomato volume. That is the paradox of California tomatoes. Less romantic than the image of traditional farms, yet one of the most efficient agricultural machines ever built. America rarely notices lettuce until store shelves suddenly go empty. From burgers, sandwiches, and salad bowls to fast food chains and convenience stores, lettuce appears almost everywhere. With its delicate and temperamental nature, lettuce is also one of the agricultural products that demands the highest speed. During harvest season, which takes place nearly year-round thanks to overlapping growing regions, cutting machines or manual labor crews move continuously through the fields, cutting lettuce, packing cartons, and transferring them immediately into cooling systems within a short time. Because lettuce contains a high amount of water and loses crispness easily, every hour of delay causes quality to decline rapidly. Those cartons of lettuce are then loaded onto refrigerated trucks, leaving the fields for distribution centers, supermarkets, and restaurants across the United States. From the moment it is cut from the root to the moment it appears in a burger or salad bowl, time is always the deciding factor. Regions such as Salinas Valley, Monterey County, and Imperial Valley create an overlapping seasonal production chain, supplying around 6 to 8 billion pounds of lettuce each year, and helping this vegetable remain available almost year-round across the American market. However, because it is consumed fresh and almost never cooked, lettuce also carries higher food safety risks than many other agricultural products. When lettuce faces a problem, the entire United States suddenly realizes how dependent it is on it. That is what makes California lettuce unique. Little glamour, little attention, yet operating like a gigantic logistics machine. The greatest challenge for agriculture and daily life in coastal desert countries such as Israel, Morocco, and the United Arab Emirates is not land, but the scarcity of fresh water. Rather than accepting this limitation, they chose not to yield. Through technological innovation, these nations have turned a weakness into an advantage, directly converting seawater into fresh water to sustain agriculture on sand. At the heart of this transformation lies reverse osmosis technology, a solution that is intelligent, efficient, and truly groundbreaking. Seawater is drawn in through large-scale intake systems, then pressurized to extremely high levels, up to 60 to 80 bar, and forced through ultra-thin nanofiltration membranes. These membranes are so fine that only water molecules can pass through, while nearly all salt and impurities are retained. The result is a stream of purified water suitable for agricultural use. However, desalination is inherently expensive. To address this, desert nations have adopted a systemic strategy, integrating desalination plants with on-site solar and wind power facilities. By harnessing abundant renewable energy, production costs have been significantly reduced, reaching as low as about 0.5 per cubic meter. As a result, seawater is no longer a barrier, but a strategic resource, enabling the rise of high-tech agriculture in the heart of the desert. There's a surprising truth. Many leading agricultural experts actually prefer desert sand over fertile soil. The reason is simple, yet strategic. Sand allows for control, while fertile soil does not. Think of sand as a sterile blank canvas. It contains no inherent nutrients, no complex microbial activity, and no unpredictable variables. This allows fertigation systems to achieve 100% control over nutrient delivery. Fertilizers are precisely dissolved into water, and delivered directly to the roots, reducing up to 95% of nutrient loss and completely eliminating the need for plants to search for nutrients. A massive advantage under extreme temperatures that can reach 50 degrees Celsius. Today, countries like Israel and Morocco are using this technology on a very large scale. In Israel, more than 75% of farmland is equipped with modern irrigation systems, to the point where water is no longer just a resource, but also a tool for cooperation and influence with other nations. Meanwhile, in regions like Central Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, despite severe water shortages, many farmers still cannot adopt it. The reason is simple: the technology is too expensive. It's not that they don't need it, they simply can't afford access. Prickly pear, Opuntia ficus indica, the most iconic fruit of Mexico's desert regions, is also a migrant from the Americas, yet it has now greened over 50,000 hectares of desert land in Mexico. It can withstand temperatures up to 65 degrees Celsius, a level that would destroy most other crops. What sets it apart is that its way of survival goes against the norm. While most plants breathe during the day for photosynthesis, it shuts down to conserve water. At night, when temperatures drop, it opens up to absorb CO2. This night shift strategy is exactly what allows it to thrive in environments where water is a luxury. Its roots don't grow deep, only about 10 centimeters, but instead spread widely, reaching over 10 meters. Thanks to this, even brief rainfall or a thin layer of dew can be captured and used efficiently. As a result, to produce the same amount of biomass, it requires only 1/5 the water of conventional crops. After just a few years, the plant begins to bear fruit and continue producing steadily for up to 30 years. Harvesting is typically done early in the morning to avoid heat and preserve moisture. The fruits are then cleaned using rotating brushes and high-pressure air to remove tiny spines before packaging. The taste is mildly sweet, often described as a blend of watermelon and pear, refreshing, light, and perfectly suited for hot desert climates. A single hectare of desert can yield tens of tons of fruit, with a sweetness of around 15% Brix, comparable to tropical fruits. However, the real gold mine lies in the seeds. To produce just 1 liter of oil, around 1 million seeds must be cold-pressed. Because of this intensive process, prickly pear seed oil can reach prices of up to $2,000 per liter, making it one of the most luxurious anti-aging ingredients in the world. Let's head to the vast fields of Charente melon in Charente, France, the birthplace of this premium melon variety. Been harvested during the harvest season from June to September, when warm sunshine helps the fruit reach optimal sweetness and aroma. Before harvesting, workers use handheld devices to measure sugar levels, ensuring a minimum Brix of 12 to 14, the required threshold for premium classification. For Charente melons, the harvest timing is also determined by a natural crack at the stem and the distinctive fragrance that begins to develop around the fruit. Notably, each hectare can produce up to 30 tons, but only about 60 to 70% meet high-end export standards. The selected melons are hand-picked early in the morning and gently placed onto conveyor systems running along the fields, minimizing impact to preserve their thin skin and soft flesh, both highly delicate characteristics of this variety. Environmental conditions are also carefully monitored to prevent quality loss immediately after harvest. At the packing facility, each fruit passes through high-speed camera systems that analyze size, color, and the uniformity of its netting pattern. Some facilities also use optical sensors to detect internal defects invisible to the naked eye. The melons are then rapidly cooled to stabilize their texture and preserve their natural aroma before packaging. Continuing the lineup of drought-resistant biological machines, chickpea stands out as an efficient, natural protein production system, thriving even on poor sandy soils. At its core is its symbiotic relationship with Rhizobium bacteria in the roots, allowing the plant to absorb nitrogen directly from the air and convert it into nutrients. Thanks to this, farms can reduce chemical fertilizer costs by up to 40% in subsequent growing cycles. To preserve precious moisture, chickpea seeds are planted using precision technology, placing them directly into deeper, moisture-retaining soil layers instead of disturbing the surface. This approach ensures stable germination and strong growth even under arid conditions, while still achieving a protein content of over 25%. During harvest, specialized combine machines cut close to the ground, where pod density is highest. The seeds are then cleaned using high-pressure air streams, reaching near-perfect purity before entering the production chain for high-value products such as hummus, a creamy, slightly tangy food made from ground chickpeas blended with sesame, olive oil, and lemon. From a traditional crop, chickpeas are rapidly becoming a cornerstone of sustainable agriculture, especially in regions facing drought and land degradation.